Welcome to the Roy Morgan Weekly Update. Today we bring you news of an in-depth Roy Morgan study just released on cybercrime conducted for the Australian Institute of Criminology. Some of the key findings are that victimisation rates remain high. 47% of Australians experienced at least one form of cybercrime in the past 12 months. 27% experienced online abuse and harassment. 20.6% were victims of malware. 21.9% experienced identity crime and misuse. 9.5% fell victim to fraud and scams. In-depth analysis by the Australian Institute of Criminology found cybercrime victimisation remains widespread. Formal help seeking is still low, and many victims continue to suffer negative impacts. To learn more about the study, and there are interesting age and gender analyses, head to the Roy Morgan website. Next, to sport and sponsorship. Roy Morgan interviews Australians all year round, asking about their involvement in motorsports. This includes watching events like Bathurst 1000 and the other motorsports on TV, attending motorsports events in person, and even whether they take part in motorsports events themselves. We also ask Australians what brands they associate with major sporting events, such as the V8 supercars, which includes this week's Bathurst 1000 race at Mount Panorama. Over 3 million people, that's 13% of Australians aged 14 plus, associate Supercheap Auto with V8 supercars. Now, Supercheap Auto was the long-running naming rights sponsor for the Bathurst 1000 for 16 years, from 2005 to 2020, although that sponsorship has now ended. This is a great example of the powerful association that comes from sponsoring an event for a long period. There's a real halo effect. In second place is Red Bull. Over 2.5 million people, or 11% of Australians, associate the well-known sports drink with V8 supercars. Red Bull has been the naming rights sponsor of the most successful team in supercars for more than a decade, since 2013. In third place is Repco, the new naming rights sponsor of the Bathurst 1000 from 2021, mentioned by 9% of respondents, equivalent to more than 2 million Australians. Importantly, for those Australians who are more heavily engaged in the sport, who attend motorsport Bathurst 1000 events, or viewers, or those taking part in motorsports, these brand associations are far higher. To learn more about what brands to look out for at this week's Bathurst 1000, visit Roy Morgan website. Turning now to the two major sporting codes which have held their grand finals over the last 2 weekends, the NRL and of course the AFL. And congratulations are due to the NRL. The NRL grand final between the Broncos and Storm attracted a record audience of 4.46 million viewers, the most watched NRL grand final of all time, up 33% on just a year ago. And for the first time in a decade, the NRL Grand Final viewing numbers bested the AFL, which had an average of 4.18 million viewers for the match between the Lions and the Cats. Importantly, the NRL Grand Final is of course played in prime viewing time slot on a Sunday night, before public holidays in New South Wales and Queensland. This compares to the AFL Grand Final that's played during the day on a Saturday afternoon. The larger viewership for the NRL Grand Final is especially impressive, considering that the Roy Morgan Sporting Monitor shows the AFL has far more supporters. More than 9.7 million Australians support an AFL team. This compares to 7.2 million that support an NRL team. And now to the weekly indicators. The ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence dropped 1.2 points to 85.1 this week, after the Reserve Bank left interest rates unchanged last week. Although the Reserve Bank's decision was widely expected after the ABS released an elevated inflation reading for August, the highest official inflation for over a year, the news is clearly disappointing to any mortgage holders hoping for a cut. There was weakness across the index with the 5 indicators relating to personal finances, views on the Australian economy, and whether now is a good or bad time to buy major household items, all down from a week earlier. The rising official inflation and Reserve Bank decision to hold interest rates is a clear signal that policymakers remain worried about inflation. And this week, ANZ Roy Morgan inflation expectations increased, up 0.1% to 5.2%, the highest for 2 months. So Australians are expecting annual inflation of 5.2% over the next 2 years. Now to business. Australia's businesses are clearly more confident than consumers. Australian business confidence for the month of September increased 3 points to 101.6, just above the neutral level of 100. The increase in business confidence came after the Reserve Bank cut interest rates in late August, but before the decision to leave interest rates unchanged in September just last week. This Roy Morgan Business Confidence series is based on interviews with 1,200 businesses each month to gauge their views on their company's prospects as well as their assessment of the broader Australian economy. Driving business confidence higher in September was more businesses saying they're better off than a year ago, and more businesses saying now is a good time to invest in growing their business. Over the 2 months of August and September, the most confident industries were mining at the top, which recorded a business confidence of 129.8, accommodation and food services on 122.8, and administration and support services on 120.4. At the other end of the scale, we have wholesale trade on only 74, and agriculture, forestry and fishing on just 76.8, both well below any other industries. That's it for today. I'll be back next week to bring you the latest data for consumer confidence, inflation expectations and unemployment. Thanks for listening.